Hey guys, welcome back to another video. I hope you're having a wonderful week and staying safe out there. So I'm sure that most carriers feel like for the longest time, we have been pushed aside by everybody, including the FMCSA. I have noticed a ton of comments on this channel through the years about how unfair it is that the FMCSA regulates and sometimes over-regulates carriers in what they do, yet brokers seem to have a green light and can do as they please. So finally, I come to you guys with some good news, which revolves around a new regulation that the FMCSA will implement in order to protect carriers from fraudulent brokers. So let's chat about it. Ready? Let's go! So let's get right into it. For those of you who are not aware of this, freight brokers are required by the FMCSA to keep a bond, a surety bond of $75,000. What is it for? Well, it's kind of like insurance that is there to benefit the carriers. If the freight broker fails to pay the carrier for services rendered, the carrier can file against the broker's bond, that's $75,000, and get paid for their services. Now, just to clarify this, the $75,000 bond is there, and if a carrier files against that bond for a load that they did for $5,000, that means the bond is now at $70,000. All right, according to the FMCSA, and I quote, "We are aware that some brokers choose to withhold payment to motor carriers for services rendered. Motor carriers can then submit claims to the financial responsibility provider to receive payment," which is basically the carrier's filing against the broker's bond. In this document, the FMCSA continues on with explaining how time-consuming and costly it is to the carrier if the bond is dry, meaning that a ton of carriers filed against that $75,000 bond because the broker is simply not paying and there is nothing left. So according to FreightWaves, and I quote, "The FMCSA is tightening oversight in 5 areas of brokers' financial responsibility, as well as consequences for non-compliance." Now, I'm not going to talk about all the 5 areas that the FMCSA touches upon, but I will attach that ruling down below so that you guys can read it. I want to focus on the one thing that will affect carriers the most: immediate suspension of the broker's or freight forwarder's authority when their bond falls below the $75,000 mark. Now listen to this. If the available financial security falls below $75,000 and the broker or freight forwarder does not replenish funds within 7 calendar days or business days after the notice from the FMCSA, the agency will issue a notification of suspension of operating authority to the broker or freight forwarder. Now, as you can imagine, when this was open to comments, carriers were very excited and said that they think that this bond should be increased to reflect inflation. Some said to $100,000, some said to $250,000. Now, brokers in their comments said that $75,000 is way too high. It makes it very hard to get into business. And I think several said that $5,000 would be enough for the bond. Thankfully, the $75,000 is here to stay as the minimum requirement for brokers to start operating. But now, if that $75,000 is getting reduced and not replenished by the broker, guess what? They are at risk of losing their authority. Now, to be quite honest, it's funny how timing works, right? Because we already know how many brokers manage to expand their business or cover their operating costs. In case you didn't watch that video, well, the most common way that brokers actually operate is with asset-based lending. This is when the shipper pays the broker for the carrier's services. The broker knows that they have 30 days before the invoice comes due, and basically they use the money that belongs to the carrier to cover their own costs and expand or whatnot. And what ends up happening? Well, they spend the carrier's money already. Their liquidity is going to crap because of the market situation. And basically, when it comes time to pay, they are not able to. So either they pay late or they don't pay at all. Now, again, I'm not talking about all brokers here, but I'm talking about those few that are constantly late on payments or, worst case scenario, just don't pay their carriers. So what do carriers do? Well, carriers start filing against that broker's bond, and eventually that bond does end up drying out if the broker is not replenishing it. And basically those carriers that are unpaid and try to file against the bond that already dried up because every other carrier filed against that bond, well, they're in trouble. So this new rule, which by the way will come into effect on January 16th of 2024, will hopefully encourage brokers to prioritize carrier payments. Now, even though the rule is going to come into effect on January 16th of 2024, the compliance date is actually January 16th of 2025, which is the big bummer here. In either case, I was personally really happy to hear that the FMCSA is finally moving in the right direction and starting to regulate brokers more. The next thing that should be on their agenda is really broker transparency. Anyway, guys, a short and sweet video this time. Wishing you a wonderful rest of your week, and I'll see you in the next video.